Our next talk today will be a panel on preventing and understanding disease. In this talk, we'll hear from three ladies on their experiences in this space. We'll hear from Dr. Jaclyn Taroni. She's the principal data scientist at the Childhood Cancer Data Lab, a program of Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation. Dr. Eleni Anni is an associate professor at Temple University in the biology department in the Neuroscience program. And Karen Etchberger is the head of INT Operational Excellence for CSL Behring. Karen will be moderating this discussion today. The last few minutes of this panel will open up to questions similarly to Nelly's, so we're looking forward to learning more about data science in this space. Post questions in the chat as you have them, and we'll wind up bringing them back up to the speakers. Quick reminder to please mute up your microphone and turn off your video, and we're looking forward to it. Welcome, ladies.
Thanks, Carly. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I just think it's awesome that we're all together for International Women's Day. It's a great celebration of the power of women in the world, and I think this is a wonderful topic that demonstrates that, and it's a rich agenda that I think that has been put together for today, so that's just terrific to see. As Carly said, I'm responsible for operational excellence and information and technology with CSL Behring. I've been with the company for a couple of decades, and before I start in on the questions for our panels, I just wanted to reflect on a comment that Nelly made about international experience, because I had the opportunity to live and work in Europe for a while. It was a huge leap of faith, but for anybody that's looking to grow your career and to stretch your boundaries, doing an international assignment, and for that matter, working in other countries, because I've done a ton of that in Asia, as well, is just a wonderful growth opportunity. So I'll just echo the power of that development opportunity that you all will have if you're adventuresome and want to actually take that leap of faith. So we have a number of questions that I'm going to pose to the panel as we go through, and then, as Carly said, we will certainly have some time at the end where we'll look to hear some of your questions that come front of mind based on what you've been hearing from the panelists. Helen, I think I'll start with you if you'd like to add anything to your introduction, and then if you can please share with us why data science is so important for understanding and preventing disease. I think you might be muted.
Good morning, everyone. I have been working in the field of neurodevelopmental diseases for several years, and I have looked for opportunities to enrich my tools and my knowledge by working in Philadelphia, but also across the globe. I have worked in France, in Italy, and I spent 2 years in Japan learning new technologies. So I can add to this, to what Karen said about enriching our words and our experiences by collaborating with different teams across the world, which is becoming much easier nowadays than it was in my times.
Thanks, Helen. So the first question I'll hear some comments from you on is, why is data science important for understanding and preventing disease?
First of all, in order to understand disease nowadays, we are looking not only on exterior symptoms, but also at the mechanism that diseases develop. That means what kind of cells and what kind of molecules and what is the sequence of events that lead to disease, and what are the risk factors for disease. In my field, nowadays, we are looking not at the average of all the cells in a tissue, for example, that causes disease, but we have the ability to look at individual cells and the characteristics of each cell and the networks that the cells belong. Because nowadays our understanding about disease is not, as I said, the symptoms, but this is how the cells, each one is a little bit different, and change their contribution in the network that they participate. So probably many of you have heard about RNA-seq. So we are looking at the gene expression, which characterize every gene. And we can look at 100,000 genes at the same time, 100,000 cells at the same time, and looking at 25,000 genes. So you can imagine how the size of our data base is. And since we are living organisms, and these systems are highly dynamic, so you need the temporal also component in the description of the disease. Not to mention also all the information about the risk, the genetic risk for every disease, and the family tree, the family history, who else in the family has the same disease. This is about understanding disease. For preventing disease, I think even you understand that there is the disease, then in order to have a good public health policy, you need to be able to also collect epidemiological data. And also, if you know the causes of a disease and the risk, the big missing factor, I think, is the educational component. You can go back to the communities and educate the communities, and you can prevent disease this way before you need the drugs to get to the treatment of diseases.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure we'll hear lots of examples about huge data sets as we go through this conversation. So maybe Jaclyn, over to you. Would you like to add some more introductory comments about yourself before I share a question with you?
Yeah, thank you. So I am Jaclyn. As my intro said, I'm the principal data scientist at the Childhood Cancer Data Lab, which is a program of Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation, which is one of the leading non-governmental funders of pediatric cancer research in the US. The CCDL was founded essentially to help pediatric cancer researchers get access to tools, data, as well as knowledge, or kind of educational efforts to capitalize on big data, as it were. So I have the privilege of working with a team of kind of engineers, user experience designers, as well as data scientists, which I think has kind of shaped my perspective, certainly about what we're going to talk about today.
Awesome, thank you. So, and then a question for you, which is probably pretty pertinent in terms of your area of focus. From your point of view, what's the largest barrier there is to preventing or understanding childhood cancer?
Yeah, so I think it is in part kind of three areas that we focus on, and even more general than that. So there's certainly, under the Orphan Drug Act in the United States, all childhood cancer, or I believe all, certainly the majority of pediatric cancers, are rare diseases. So there is this aspect of essentially collecting enough data to have statistical power, for example, and kind of putting all of that data from different institutions in the same place, or where folks can access it to do research, as well as kind of training people to put that data to work, or making sure people have what they need to use their domain expertise to ask questions using that data. I think perhaps what is the biggest issue is resources. We heard a little bit about that so far as having access to resources, I think, is a large barrier. The National Cancer Institute budget for pediatric cancers, it hovers about 5% of that budget. So certainly access to resources is a big part of the challenges.
That makes a lot of sense. The next question I think would be interesting to hear from both of you. And Jaclyn, since you currently have the mic, I'll go to you first with this question. So how did you come to work in your area of expertise, and why do you still work in this area?
Yeah, so I actually went to graduate school thinking I was going to be an immunologist. And I happened to be in an umbrella program, and, took a rotation in Jason Moore's lab. Jason Moore, who's at Penn Medicine, but he was at Dartmouth at the time, and kind of enjoyed that perspective of kind of computational approaches to biological problems. And the rest I say is history. Ended up in working on a rare autoimmune disease, so got to kind of work at the intersection of biology that I was really interested in, and also kind of these computational approaches. So I think for me, the idea of bringing big data that may or may not assay kind of a disease of interest to bear for rare diseases is something that's really of interest to me. And of course, being part of an organization like Alex's, having the opportunity to work on pediatric cancer is a privilege. So that's certainly a big part of that as well.
Yeah. Yep. So CSL is a rare disease company largely, and I certainly appreciate that motivation and the privilege to actually be able to make a difference in the rare disease space. I definitely align with that feeling. So Helen, how about for you? How did you come to work in your area of expertise, and why are you still in that same area?
So coincidences are important. I started as a biochemist, getting training in structural biology at the University of Pennsylvania, and becoming a biophysicist, which I further expanded when I went. I spent 2 years learning lasers and spectroscopy in Japan. And from that point on, though, looking at the single protein, as exciting as it was, and looking at the three-dimensional structure and electron tunneling was not very satisfying. It was satisfying intellectually, but it was not satisfying because I could not see the application to a disease. And so I had the opportunity to join Thomas Jefferson University, a big center that was working on alcohol-related diseases. And alcohol, it's a small molecule that it's one of the most dirty drugs, you could say, because it affects probably 200 different types of cells, all the cells we have, and a number of organs. So I came to this, and I focus on the neurodevelopmental early stages of development of the brain. So the effects of alcohol to the brain development, and this comes together with a lot of neurodevelopmental diseases. And then I expanded. I had to expand, gain from simple reactions and simple steps of alcohol metabolism to collecting data, so that you can have enough data to have answers of how the whole tissue, the adaptive mechanism that were coming into play. And I'm still into this because this ties not only to fetal alcohol syndrome disorders, but to a lot of neurodevelopmental diseases. And at this stage, we have to come to appreciate that many of these neurodevelopmental diseases have common dysregulation, common patterns of where the problem starts. And so that's the good part. The difficult part is, of course, to have a differential diagnosis and the ability to differentiate, because many of these diseases are quite overlapping, at least at the early stages of development. So I find it fascinating, and as I have said several times to my students and also older colleagues, I think the driving force for me is that every day I'm coming to the lab, and I'm like a kid in a toy store, and there is a riddle and there is a puzzle that I'm trying to resolve, and I get the same excitement if I find the answer, or myself, or if I find that somebody else has figured out an answer.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love your analogy of being a kid in a toy or a candy store, right? Just the land of opportunity that you have, and no wonder you stay in that space, obviously. So Jaclyn, maybe over to you, I think, for this next question. There are at least 3 elements, probably a ton more, but 3 key ones that are probably required for successful application of data science in the biomedical domain. One of them you touched on a little bit, workforce capacity, but I think the other important ones are tooling and methods, and then also access to data, really just pure availability to data, the structure of that data, the quality of that data. I'm interested to hear, from your perspective, which of these is the biggest challenges in terms of really trying to progress the thinking in your space, and have you seen any recent changes that are making it easier? And if you have or haven't seen changes, are there things you would actually recommend for the future to make those better?
Yeah, as you mentioned, that's 3 out of many we could have kind of probably picked up on or talked about. Certainly one thing I'm excited about is this kind of move from the traditional model of kind of high throughput data analysis in the biomedical research domain. So traditionally, we download large data sets. Now there's more of this movement through tools like Anvil, for example, or things like that, where we are kind of giving people access to data that's in the cloud or in one place. So that can help. We have a product that process terabytes of data, certainly moving data around the internet, and that was publicly available data, so not even access controlled data. So certainly kind of just working with it can present or getting access to it from a technical point of view is a challenge. So moving to kind of tools that the data is in a cloud, and it's having access to these data sets in these kind of controlled environments, bringing your tools to the data. So I'm excited about different efforts like that that are out there more generally, and then also in the pediatric cancer space kind of specifically. So I think that's very powerful, but I think the workforce development or workforce capacity part is really important, or even kind of a different way of thinking about building these tools. So certainly for me, coming from an academic background, I didn't know what user experience design was, right? I didn't understand user research. Kind of how working in my current position has really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that we should be taking into account what people's needs are and kind of addressing friction points from them from the outside. So I think making sure that when we have these exciting developments, we are talking to the researchers that we expect to use these tools is going to be a big part of it. But I also think training folks to use it, because I think I came from a mentality, if you build it, they will come. And I'm not sure that is the case. I think people need maybe more support and resources to learn things to really kind of put these tools to work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's increasingly just hard to fathom volumes of data that's available, and obviously becoming more and more available publicly and easily accessible when it's hanging out in the cloud. I think the opportunity and the challenge is to actually figure out how you capitalize on that and translate it into information that you can really apply to answer questions. Yeah, totally agree. Helen, going to be a little bit practical with this next question. If you were going to give somebody advice about how they could apply data science to understanding a disease, and you have a really good example with fetal alcohol syndrome, what would be the key pieces of advice that you would suggest for somebody to think about as they were embarking on trying to understand a disease?
There are many elements in understanding the disease. In terms of tools or skills that one needs, Coming from an academic perspective, I always believe that it's good to have an understanding of the biological basis of the disease before you embark into what you used to call, when you were writing grants for NIH some years ago, it was always a fishing expedition. So when you were proposing to look into data, the reviewers would come back with this idea of you don't have a hypothesis, and so it was not easy at the beginning to convince study sections at NIH that it's not a fishing expedition, but you are going, first of all, use the data to develop a hypothesis. And this is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with this idea of developing a hypothesis. Instead of thinking that based on the data that you have at hand, you can develop the hypothesis. There is so much more behind the few trees of the forest. There's a whole forest out there. And a lot of times you get your hypothesis. I have been privileged by this, of getting hypotheses from data that I analyze myself. I find, because the data are, I believe they are unstructured. So there's not easy way, there is no textbook, there is no protocol that in order to find the data, you can go to steps A, B, C, D. You have really to be curious enough and innovative enough to try to do different searches to find the data, and rely also on your network. And I think the National Institute of Health, with different big initiatives and providing finance resources, has made a dent into this, although we need much more. So I think if anyone would be interested in understanding the disease from the point of view of data science, one should acquire these tools. So data analytics, and coming not only from the computer science branch, but also coming here at Temple. I'm at Temple University, so we do have certificates and now undergraduate programs and PhDs in genomics, for example, in genomic science and understanding, and bioinformatics. I learned all my bioinformatics from my collaborator at Jefferson, who was a bioengineer, and he learned biology from me. So I do believe a lot in working in collaborative teams that bring in diverse talents, so that you can take advantage of all this big data that they are out there.
Yeah. Collaborative efforts are so rich when you can work together. So maybe a follow-on in terms of open collaborative data analysis. You do hear a lot of talk about that. I think you do see a number of places where people are trying to do that. Do you think there's things that we should be doing to make it easier? And have you tried some of them?
I have not had the chance to try open data, but I think that it will be useful as long as this data come with enough information about how the data were obtained, the scripts and the codes, so that one can, and links to supplemental data, so raw data, so that one would be able to reproduce this data, because it is well known, especially in cancer, but also in psychology and other fields, that probably half of the data are not reproducible. There are errors, and science progress by reproducibility. So I think it's important that we put some, I think journals and publishers try to, and reviewers have an obligation to be more careful when they look at data, to review them, and run even randomly some of the codes to see that, or pieces of the data that they are of interest. That's the way that we start always with research. You repeat somebody else's experiment, real or virtual, you analyze data. So I think there is a reproducibility project out there that analyzes high impact research, especially for this reason. And that will help, I think, in the quality of the data also.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. Maybe changing gears a little bit. In addition to today being International Women's Day, it's obviously another day in the fight against COVID globally. So I'm curious, Jaclyn, to hear from you. If you put your mystical glasses on and look, backwards a little bit, should we have been really thinking differently about the data around COVID and listening to it differently? And then if you look forward into that crystal ball, are there still things that we aren't listening to that the data is telling us about COVID?
Yeah, certainly very timely topic. I think it's a little bit beyond my area of specific expertise, but I will say, kind of reading about some of the stuff coming out of 4CE, which is the Consortium for Clinical Characterization of COVID-19 by EHR. This idea that I think they had over 20 sites, and that is in different, that's an international effort. I think what it seems that they kind of attribute some of their success to is kind of getting things into a common data model. So getting data where it needs to be. And I think it seems like probably, or certainly even, some of that success comes from probably kind of foresight into an investment in kind of probably infrastructure ahead of time. So I think there are ways that I think thinking about data infrastructure before we need it, before like there's an immediate need, thinking about it in kind of a long-term goal instead of kind of short-term. I think that is maybe one lesson that we can take. I also, again, not necessarily my area of expertise, but kind of this idea of genetic or genomic surveillance, where kind of that is kind of patchy in the United States in the context of COVID. So I imagine that might change going forward. Yeah. Hopefully that will change going forward.
Yeah, very, very good insights. Yeah. I think we're just about out of time, so I'll probably pause and we can take some questions from the chat. Carly or Michelle, because they're actually not populating on the sheet I'm looking at, so hopefully you guys can see them and relay any messages we're getting from the audience.
Yeah, I'm taking a look right now. It looks like Madeline put a little note. If anybody has any questions, feel free to go ahead and post them in the chat.
I do have a couple of other questions I can ask if we're not getting any chat.
Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah. So maybe I think with it being International Women's Day, I'm interested to hear from both of you what your perspectives are on whether the glass ceiling is still intact in the medical, pharma, biomedical, all those combinations of fields today, or do you think it's been thoroughly crashed? Maybe Helen, starting with you.
Yeah, I think the ceiling has moved a little bit closer down in the biotech and pharma because there are more women in senior positions in comparison with the financial sector, for example.
Yeah.
I think the executive positions and the leader positions are still women share a very small portion, and it's not of what we were taught about the pipeline. It's not the pipeline that it's leaky or it's a small pipeline. I think it's a problem of really creating networks and opportunities for women to move into this kind of positions. on the academic side, the ceiling is much more higher. I have been at University of Pennsylvania, Thomas Jefferson University, and Temple University, and I have been counting how many women chairmen have been in the different departments and how long they lasted in these departments, not for lack of skills again. So this is an aspiring goal to move and inspire women to move into these positions of leadership positions that take a different set of skills, that the skills of that women probably would like to use, the managerial skills, which we don't learn in school. So opportunities, mentorship, I think, play a big role in for moving women, and of course, networking.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, thank you, Jaclyn. Any thoughts from your perspective as we close out?
Yeah, I would say I have a kind of limited view in the sense that I guess this panel is centered on life sciences, where definitely I think the slight majority of PhDs are awarded to women. I'm in a nonprofit sector, and certainly I've grown in and advanced kind of as my own team has grown. But I think certainly there's kind of longstanding inequities or lack of support or kind of sometimes hostility for folks who have multiple kind of intersecting identities and are part of multiple marginalized groups. So certainly networking, access to resources, all things like that are certainly to be considered.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, networking is so important, as is mentoring. I think mentoring is something I'm really passionate about. And so I can, give back and try and help people along that journey more quickly so they don't go through quite as many challenges as I did and can learn from. And I think that's something we can all do throughout our careers. Wherever you are in your career, you can share that wisdom. So Helen and Jaclyn, thank you both very much. I appreciate your insights today. Really interesting. I'm sure the audience enjoyed them as well. Carly and Michelle, anything closing comments over to you?
Thank you, ladies, so much. What an incredible talk, hearing more about preventing and understanding disease and how it's applied in your daily work and how COVID can pull all of this in. It's super interesting. Thank you, ladies, so much. We really appreciate it. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to post them in the chat and we can reach out to our wonderful speakers and hopefully they can answer that for you. But up next, we are going to have a quick 15-minute break, but followed by that will be the WIDS worldwide stream. This section is to broadcast globally today in honor of International Women's Day and highlight many different Stanford and Bay Area speakers, as well as others. We're really excited to hear from women worldwide, so please go to the link provided and be sure to come back at 1:15 sharp to hear from the Challenges of Data panel. I will provide the link in the chat, but I also will share my screen so you can go ahead and visit that link. A quick reminder just to keep your microphone muted and turn off your video, but if you have any questions about accessing the live stream, feel free to ask in the chat, and we will see you back at 1:15 p.m. Thanks, everyone.